Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening. Welcome to News in Focus. My name is Faraz Patel. I would like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us here on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. It's just over 24 hours ago. And South Africans, including myself, are still trying to digest what had happened yesterday. The postponed budget speech. The fact that two members of the Government of National Unity cannot see or come to an agreement when it comes to specifically the value-added tax proposal that Minister Enoch Godongwana was going to put forward to the legislature. And just obviously immediately after the postponement had happened, the budget speech was leaked. And again, talking about that VAT increase, the proposal was right there on the table. What happens between now and potentially the 12th of March? How do South Africans go about sorting their lives out? But how does the economy, how does the markets react to this? And what about the discussions that's going to happen with regards to that potential VAT increase? So let me start off with my first guest. I'd like to welcome Liso Mdutyana, who is a tax and budget policy researcher at the Institute for Economic Justice. Liso, thank you so much for joining us. Much appreciated.
For having me, Faraz.
Liso, listening to what happened yesterday, looking at what happened yesterday, I want to start off, of course, what was leaked and what importantly was some of the stuff that I think the juicy part of all of this. And I'm going to quote what was supposed to be said yesterday from Minister Enoch Godongwana. We propose the raise of VAT by 2 percentage points to 17%. This is the one that I think really catches everyone. A necessary step that will enable us to, on a number of occasions, I'm not going to mention all of them. The fact that it was 2%, looking at it, how much does this really, should this go through on the 12th of March, take so much of the chunk that South Africans cannot afford right now?
That's a wonderful question. So we should, I think what's important is to kind of contextualize this proposed tax increase in light of what has happened in the past few years. And the important things that have happened in the past few years is that there has been a very rapid rise in the cost of living. What has happened in the past couple of years is that people's income levels have grown very slowly. So you pair those two things, the cost of living is rising, and yet people's ability to cope with that cost of living is shrinking or is rising at a much slower pace. And then you have a cocktail for disaster if you are now putting up this VAT increase, because you are taking away from people that are already overburdened with a high cost of living. So it would have taken away quite a lot, especially obviously from poor households who, even with the proposed zero rating of products, may not actually have benefited that much, because even when you zero rate a product, it is still dependent on the producers, on the suppliers, how they actually react to that zero rating. So it would have been a disaster for us. It would have been a disaster.
I'm thinking of a disaster. Look, Liso, you're much better with numbers than I would ever be. If we take 17%, a product that would have costed, and of course there are, of course, certain exclusions, certain edible items that were, of course, going to have a 0% increase when it comes to value-added tax. But let's just take any product, for example, a product that may be of a necessity to any consumer out there. Something that would have costed 18 Rand would maybe now cost 24 Rand or even 25 Rand, given this 2% tax increase. Now, that's 7 Rand. Even a 7 Rand still means quite a lot for poor households. And that for me is where I think I'm trying to understand, and many other South Africans are trying to understand, that 7 Rand, is there no way that government can look elsewhere to try and account for whatever the shortages in terms of the fiscus could occur?
Sorry, could you repeat your last question?
The question I'm saying is, could government not have looked at elsewhere besides value-added tax to try and make up that shortfall within the fiscus?
Again, that's an interesting question. And one of the more curious things that came out last year, I think it was around November, was that the government was looking at ways in which it could tax net wealth. So this would have been a tax that's targeted towards people that have assets, people that are rich. And this has actually been modeled before. And one of the estimates is that the government could have gotten between 70 billion and 160 billion. So that's just one avenue. And it's something we had been hearing rumors that the government was considering. There are many other avenues. I think one of the most important things the government can do is to capacitate SARS, because SARS, after the state capture years, like between 2014 and 2018, has demonstrated itself to be a very capable institution. And it has led to an increase in tax compliance. So so it has been able to collect more and more revenue.
Sure.
And one of the problems it is facing is that it is underfunded. And because of that, it said in Parliament, it is not able to cope with things like base erosion and profit shifting when these companies underreport profits and therefore are taxed very little by our government. Estimates tell us that our government loses hundreds of billions per year just on that, on base erosion and profit shifting. So if the government could capacitate SARS, if the government could consider a net wealth tax, if the government could take tax breaks that are given to individuals that earn relatively high income and therefore do not really need that kind of relief, there could be billions, hundreds of billions of rands that the fiscus can get without having to resort to a measure that so disproportionately affects poor households.
Yeah.
So we think there were many options on the table.
No, I couldn't agree more there, Liso, because here's the thing, of course, as South Africa takes over the G20, they're currently the president of the G20. What President Cyril Ramaphosa was looking at is a 15% tax for wealth across the globe. So one would say, well, why don't you start off on your front door, and that is right here in South Africa.
Exactly.
So, I mean, do you think President Ramaphosa, do you think National Treasury, do you think Cabinet has it within them to say, well, we're going to tax the wealthy within this country because this is where we start, to try and at least make up some sort of percentage of the shortfall that government is looking at?
So we know a couple of things. We know perhaps through the grapevine that the National Treasury has actually modeled, in a way, tried to get an estimate of how much it would get if it were to tax wealth. We know they have done that, even though those documents are not publicly released. So we know in theory it has been in consideration. We know ANC previously on some position, for example, it has supported a wealth tax as one of the ways to raise revenue. But I think what's important to underscore is that we cannot really rely on the benevolence or goodwill of the cabinet, of parliamentarians. It's imperative that we as the public push them. We need to pressurize them. We need to show them. We need to demonstrate to them through presentations. We need to demonstrate to them through pickets. So, for example, there was a picket done in Cape Town, close to Parliament.
Yes, SAFTU led it, yeah.
SAFTU, AIDC, COSATU. So those are the things that we need to do as a society to try and push our leaders, our policymakers into taking up these things, because it is unlikely that they will just come to those things by themselves. Often they will look at revenue-raising measures that are relatively easy for example, for the rich, for markets, for capital. So it's imperative for us to be the ones that push and that put pressure.
Now, Liso, between now and the 12th of March should, of course, it still go ahead, because this debate around tax between the ANC and the Democratic Alliance is going to be one that's going to be heavily debated, set upon, debated upon on so many issues. What changes? Because if you're a South African citizen right now, you're thinking, the anxiety is not what we want. We want a clear plan from Cabinet, from Treasury, on how they're going to do this. So what happens between now and then? Because if we are judging from what we are reading right here, this proposition of the 2% increase is still going to be on the table when Ido Kodogwana delivers this postponed budget speech on March the 12th.
So I think this will be mostly an area of speculation given what has came out. But what is clear, or what is apparent rather, is that the DA would have likely rejected the budget if the ANC had went on and made presentations to Parliament and made this proposal about a VAT increase. So we do not know exactly what kind of agreement they will need to come to, but they will need to find each other at some point. And you know, that's a terrifying prospect for South Africans, because if, for example, in the case that they are not able to agree that the VAT is increased, what happens to the spending that was expected to be done given the VAT revenue that would have been gained? What happens to that? So it's a very terrifying prospect, even besides the fact that people will be paying more for goods. So what is important is that these two political parties, if they are indeed the ones contesting this, they need to find each other, and a resolution. Of course, the one that we desire is one where there is no VAT increase. There are increases in other forms of taxation that do not, negatively harm the poor, because you do need the revenue. So we need them, these political parties, to make revenue proposals that will ensure that the spending which was planned for this year can be done, and where possible, it can be increased. So I'm just like you, I'm waiting in anticipation. I don't know what will happen, but hopefully it's a good outcome for poor households in South Africa.
We do hope so. That will be the case. Liso Mdutyana, thank you so much for joining us here on News in Focus on Hilaal TV. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much, Fares.
That's Liso Mdutyana, a tax and budget policy researcher at the Institute for Economic Justice. So what does the Democratic Alliance have to say? After the break, I'm going to be chatting with their spokesperson, Vali Okamp. Do stay tuned.